We are in Tributaries of Eden, Parshas Chukas. So tonight, I'd like to talk about the Gimel Matanos Tovos, as they're called, the three great gifts that were given to the Jewish people while they were traveling in the wilderness. And this begins, strangely enough, as a topic of discussion only in this week's Parsha, when we fast forward 40 years, or 38 plus years, as the Torah tells us, Vayevayu b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda midbar tzin b'chodesh harishon, vayeshev ha'am b'kadesh v'tamas sham Miriam. We have on page 842, this week's Parsha, we have the passing of Miriam. Vatikaver sham, and she was buried there. And then the Torah tells us, V'lo haya mayim la'eda, that there was no water for the people. Why was there no water for the people? What happened? Says Rashi, and we'll see the Gemara in a minute, Mikan, from here we learn, Shekol arba'im shana, for all 40 years, haya lem ha'be'er b'zuchus Miriam. From here we learn that the well, the water that was flowing, was in the merit of Miriam. Now, isn't that strange? That there's no clue anywhere earlier in the Torah, all this time that they have water, not a clue that it's in the merit of Miriam. Then the Jewish people only find this out when the water stops after the passing of Miriam, and the Jewish people say, what just happened? Why did the water suddenly stop? And then they said, must be that it was in the merit of Miriam. Why is it? Why did Hashem set it up that way? Unless, as maybe we'll see soon, that the Torah reflects our knowledge of it. Somehow, for 40 years we're drinking water, and we didn't stop to realize in what merit we get this water. And as we'll see, one of the running themes in tonight's discussion will be the concept that we just don't appreciate what we have until we lose it. And that's so much an important theme in the Parsha. So point number one is that after the 40 years, the last year begins, Miriam passes, that's step one in the end. It's the first thing that happens after the Torah fast forwards. And Miriam passes away, and we lose the water. Of course, we do get the water back, but it's at the cost of Moshe and Aaron and their mistake, whatever it is. But let's fast forward, move a little bit forward in the parsha. On page 846, the people traveled from Kadesh. Vayevayu b'nei Yisrael kol ha'eda hor hahar. And the people came to Hor Hahar, that's the name of the mountain. And Hashem says to Moshe and to Aaron, this is where Aaron's stop is. This is the station that Aaron gets off this train. As soon as Aaron passes away, and the Jewish people finish mourning for him, Vayishma Haknani, page 848, Vayishma Haknani Melech Arad Yoshev HaNegev Ki Ba Yisrael Derech HaAsarim. That the Kanani, the king of Arad, heard that the Jewish people are coming through the land. So, did he just wake up? Did he just realize that the Jewish people are traveling? So again, Rashi tells us, and we'll see the Gemara in a second, Shama Shemeis Aaron. He heard that Aaron died, V'nistalku anane hakavod, in the clouds of glory that was surrounding and protecting the Jewish people, the invisibility cloak, the stealth shields, disappeared from the Jewish people.
How do you explain, it says Vayishma, as opposed to, you would think that if the clouds went away, you would say that he saw.
Well, he didn't actually see, someone told him. So the people,
he got a report.
right. So someone came to tell him, we finally saw the Jewish people. And so he comes to attack. And again, this is actually the source that the clouds of glory were there to protect the Jewish people in the merit of Aaron. And once again, the Jewish people miss this and don't realize it until the end of the 40 years, specifically after Aaron passes away. Only then did the Jewish people begin to understand that all this time they had been protected in the merit of Aaron.
Are you saying that's the first time they appreciated that they had been protected all that time? Or it's the first time that they appreciated that it was in the merit of Aaron?
Well, that's kind of what we're going to talk about that a little bit. The question is, why didn't they know before this that it was in the merit of Aaron? So is that a failure in understanding the clouds of glory themselves? We'll get into that, hopefully.
And my question is, why should they have thought it was because of Miriam and Aaron, respectively?
Well, why did they earn the clouds of glory?
Hashem took them out of Mitzrayim. They cooperated. They did what they were supposed to.
So we're gonna get to this, break it down exactly why this is such a strange chiddush. But let's see the Gemaras first, and then we'll talk about it. The question is whether was there a reason to just assume that there would be clouds of glory. Hopefully we'll address that point specifically. But all this comes from a Gemara. The Gemara says like this: Gemara in Tainus 9a. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yossi Rabbi Yehuda says, Shlosha parnasim tovim amdu liYisrael. 3 great parnasim is an old word for a parnes, a caretaker, a provider, a kind of leader, arose for the Jewish people. Eluhem, Moshe, Va'aron, Umiriam. Which is interesting, just in general, that we put the 3 together as parnasim. Even though we don't find much in the Torah itself that Miriam did a leading or took that kind of leadership role. The only place where we do see it is by the Yam, where she leads the women in song. But apparently, and the Mefarshim also support this, Miriam did have a much greater role in terms of leading the women in general in the Midbar.
Well, she also made sure that Moses himself, she watched him.
We're gonna get back to Miriam herself, but we're talking about just as a leadership role in the Midbar. Apparently, she was who people went to for things, and much like Moshe and Aaron were the leaders. All quiet, of course, without the Torah getting into it. But then it says, "V'gimel matanas tovos nitnu al yadam," and 3 great gifts were given through them. Be'eluhem. Be'er, Va'anan, Uman. Be'er be'zechus Miriam. The well came in the merit of Miriam. Amud Anan, the clouds of glory, be'zechus Aaron came in the merit of Aaron. And Man, be'zechus Moshe, the Man came in the merit of Moshe. Mesa Miriam, when Miriam passed away, Nistalik HaBe'er, the Jewish people lost the well. Shenamar, as it says, Vatamas Sham Miriam passed away. Uksiv Basrei, then it says, V'lo haya mayim la'eda, there was no water for the congregation. V'chazir b'zechus Shnehem, and we needed both Moshe and Aaron to bring it back. That's why Hashem sends both Moshe and Aaron to go. Everyone asks the question, why has Hashem sent Moshe and Aaron? According to the Gemara, it's because since it was Miriam's thing, so now you needed sort of the combined efforts of both Moshe and Aaron to bring that back. Mace Aaron, then Aaron passed away. Nistalku anani kavo, the clouds of glory left them. Shenamar, as it says, Vayishma Knani Melech Harad, etc. So he heard, the Gemara goes on to say, he heard that the clouds of glory went away, and he assumed that meant that God was giving the world permission to get the Jewish people. Meis Moshe, the Stalku Kulam. But then when Moshe passed away, it came back, the clouds of glory came back in the merit of Moshe, but then when Moshe passed away, they lost them all. As it says, a verse in Zechariah, the Akhid es shloshes haroim b'yarach echad, that basically Hashem says, I made the Jewish people lose their shepherds, all 3 shepherds in 1 month. meaning at the same time. The question is, it wasn't the same time. There was almost a year between Miriam's death and then Aaron's death, which is Rosh Chodesh Av, and then Moshe's death, which is not until the 7th of Adar. So it was almost a full year process. Miriam was in Nisan, so Nisan, Av, Adar, that makes it almost through a whole year. Nevertheless, says the Gemara, but because we lost all three for the final time when Moshe passed away, it was like we lost Aaron and Miriam all over again, and that's why it's considered like all three passed away at the same time. That's the Gemara in Tainus, and that's what Rashi in our Parsha is referring to, saying that this Parsha teaches us that these gifts were coming in the merit of Miriam and Aaron, and that's why the Jewish people suffered in this way, meaning they were thirsting after the passing of Miriam, and they were in war after the passing of Aaron, because these gifts came in their honor. There's another Gemara in Bava Metzia that seems to contradict this Gemara. The Gemara says there, Amar Rav Yudah Amar Rav, Kol ma she'asa Avram leMalachi Asharis ba'atzmo, anything that Avram Avinu himself did for the angels, Asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu lebanav ba'atzmo, those things in the wilderness Hashem did himself for the Jewish people. Kol ma she'asa Avram al yidei shliach, everything that Avram did through a shliach, Asa HaKadosh Baruch Hu lebanav al yidei shliach, Hashem also did to the Jewish people through a shliach. Which, by the way, takes us back to something we discussed a number of months ago when we were talking about the Ramban, and we said that the Ramban reads Sefer Bereshis not just as a story of the past, of what happened to the Jewish people then, but that through Sefer Bereshis actually tells the whole story of the Jewish people from the beginning of Bereshis Bara Elokim all the way till the end of Parshas Vayechi, which would tell you the secrets of when Mashiach is coming. That's how the Ramban reads Sefer Bereshis, and that's why the Ramban reads that Sefer Bereshis comes before the Torah, because it's giving you instructions, and if we could properly read Sefer Bereshis, we would know. So this would be another example of it. Everything that Avram Avinu in the Gemara goes on to explain. El Abakar Ratz Avraham. Avraham himself went to go get the meat. V'ruach nasa me'es Hashem, and Hashem himself sent the meat. Vayika chema v'chalav, Avram Avinu himself took the butter and the milk, meaning he himself provided the bread. Therefore, hineni mamtir lachem lechem min hashamayim. Hashem says, I will rain down the bread up for you. V'hu omed aleim tachas ha'etz, he stood over them underneath the tree. Hineni omed lefanecha sham al atzur, behold, I stand before you upon the rock. Avram holech imam l'shalcham. Avram himself escorted the angels away. Hashem holech lefneim yomam, which is why Hashem leads the Jewish people, travels with them in the cloud of glory. But when it comes to the water, well, Avram Avinu himself did not bring water. He said, Yukach na ma'at mayim, somebody go get some water. That's why Hashem sent messengers. And the water had to come through Moshe and Aaron hitting, or at least speaking to the rock. It happens through a messenger because the Jewish people are subject to whatever merit their forefathers provided. Which the Gemara challenges. Upliga the Rabbi Chama bar Rabbi Chanina, and this disagrees with the statement of Rabbi Chama bar Chanina. Now listen to this. Bischar Shlosha, who says in the merit of Avram doing 3 mitzvos, Zachu l'Shlosha, the Jewish people merit 3 things. Schar chema v'chalav, because he brought butter and milk. Zachu l'man, the Jewish people got the man. Bischar v'hu omed aleim, because he stood over them. Zachu la'amud ha'anan, they merited the clouds of glory. B'schar yukach na ma'at mayim, in the merit of Avram bringing water, zachu lebe'era shel Miriam, they merited the well of Miriam. Which sounds like the reason why the Jewish people earned the man, the clouds, and the water was because of the merit of the achnasas orchim of their grandfather Abraham. And we know that merit works that way. Avram does a little tiny act in this world, and fast forward that many years, and the Jewish people are going to get these huge rewards of enough food for 600,000 people, enough water for families, enough water for 600,000 families, and the shade and protection of the clouds of glory. Asks the Maharsha in Bava Metzia, he says that these things come because of the merit of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam, or did they come out of the merit of Abraham's acts of kindness? Which one is it? So the Maharsha gives an interesting answer. He says that in the merit of Abraham, it wasn't enough to provide the Jewish people long term. It was just going to be a short-term miracle. In other words, the Jewish people were thirsting for water. They had a get-free water card from Avram Avinu. So they were going to hit the rock and they were going to get some water. Then they would have to go on without the water. The same thing, the Jewish people were hungry. They needed food. So the merit of Avram was going to be a free lunch. And the Jewish people needed protection, and the clouds of glory would give them protection maybe from the Egyptians. But they did not have enough merit to sustain these miracles for 40 years. As many of the commentaries point out, that the miracle of the man coming down every day for 40 years is greater than the splitting of the sea. Because the splitting of the sea, as miraculous as it wasn't constant. Bread falling down every day from the heavens for 40 years, that's a much greater miracle. So for that, they needed greater merit. Says the Maharsha, that's where the merit of Moshe and Aaron and Miriam comes in, that Moshe was able to provide food, Aaron to provide protection, and Miriam to provide the water. However, this explanation seems somewhat difficult, because how do we measure that? Especially since the Gemara doesn't seem to say that. The Gemara seems to say that it did come in the merit of Abraham.
And wasn't there also a fourth gift, that their clothes and things didn't wear out? And
We'll get to the clothing in just a minute. Yeah, that's the Ben Ish Chai. Well, hopefully we'll get to that soon. Okay. Furthermore, Rabbeinu Bachye, and the commentaries struggle to know where Rabbeinu Bachye gets this from, says that the reason why the well comes in the merit of Miriam is because, that's what you were quoting before, V'atesatzav achoso meirachok ladas ma'yasabo, that Miriam stood on the side of the water to see what would happen to Miriam, says Rabbeinu Bachye, because she did that, therefore she merited to bring water to the Jewish people for 40 years. Which goes back to what you were saying before. Except the problem is, how is that measure for measure? Because she stood near the water, therefore she merits to bring water to the Jewish people. How does that, just because the one happens to be water, the other happens to be water, and the Jewish people needed water, and we have someone who has great merit, and there was water in that scenery, so therefore, she's the merit of the Jewish people to get water. The commentaries struggle for the source of Rabbeinu Bachye, but what's the explanation behind what he's saying? Why should that be a reason why the Jewish people should get water because of that? So, the Ben Ish Chai has a commentary on the Gemara in Tanis. Yes?
The word Mayim is in Miriam's name.
That's true, but and that's a great nevuah on the part of her parents. But we wouldn't say that she's a merit for the water because of that. That would be just. But obviously, it's connected, right? In fact, at one point, the Ben Ish Chai says that Miriam is, if you take the reish of Miriam and spell it out, it's reish yud shin, which is an anagram of the word shir, which is song. And so she says her name is Miriam, pull out the reish, and you have Shir and Mayim. Those are her two greatest accomplishments. That's the Ben Ish Chai. But we're still working with how did she get to that? How do we get to that? So the Ben Ish Chai says, and this gets into the point that you were making before. He says, why are we calling these matanos tovos? Matanos tovos means, when you say, what's a really good gift? So it's interesting because usually we associate what's the greatest gift you've ever received. So if you think about it, the greatest gift that anyone's ever given you is not really anything, or at least it should be, not something that you needed in order to live. Because as much as that's more important, it isn't so much a gift. So if you're really hungry, you come back from a walk through the Sahara, and you're dying of thirst, and someone gives you water, it's not a gift. It's a salvation. It's something someone's giving you, but it's not a gift. He says, matanos tovos are when you see that the person goes beyond what's expected or requested of them. So if someone can take, for example, even if someone gets you dinner, if it's not just any dinner, it's not just a peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, nothing against peanut butter and jelly sandwiches, but if it's not just that, but it's something more, it's the more which becomes the measure of the gift. Basically, says the Ben Ish Chai, Hashem could have provided the Jewish people with bread for 40 years. And whether they would have liked it or not, all the little kids saying, bread again today, it still would have sustained the Jewish people. It could have been a healthy bread that still would have been the perfect bread, which doesn't make you go to the bathroom because it's all perfect. It's that perfect pill with all the vitamins the Jewish people could have lived on it. And it would have been maybe a little boring, not so exciting, but the Jewish people would have been able to eat. The fact, says the Ben Ish Chai, that Hashem said, no, I'm going to allow that whatever flavor they want, whatever taste they want, except for the cucumbers and the melons, etc. And even that they complained about. But basically, whatever you wanted, what's for dinner tonight? Whatever you want. Just think of pizza, and it'll taste like pizza. Think of chocolate cake, it'll taste like chocolate cake. It'll be getting the taste of chocolate cake without the calories.
I'll take it.
Or the aspartame.
So why didn't it taste like cucumbers and the rest of the things?
So apparently, we're told that that can be harmful to some people, especially pregnant and nursing women. At least, they're cucumbers. At least, I don't know how that works today. So as a result of that, it seems that if they were to think those tastes, somehow they would take on some of the nature of the food. Again, that's a discussion that needs to be elaborated upon. But those were the things they complained about. In fact, there are many people who have the custom on Shabbos to eat all those foods, because since the Shabbos food is in commemoration of the man, if we were holy spiritual people, we would be able to taste all the tastes in the Shabbos food as well, like they could taste in the man. But we would still be missing the garlic and the leeks and whatever, so therefore they eat those foods on Shabbos, as if to say, now we're eating all the foods like on Shabbos. It's a beautiful minhag, but says the Ben Ish Chai, the fact that Hashem allowed for the man to have all these tastes, that's what makes it a matana tova. Meaning, a true gift is when I give you more than what you need, more than you would have been satisfied with, but I went beyond what was expected. That's the matana tova. He says the same thing.
So it's like the icing on the cake.
Right. If you choose to taste, the man can taste like icing too. Right? He says, secondly, he quotes the Medrash that says that when the Jewish people would pass through the clouds of glory, it would launder their clothes for them. And that's what kept the clothing fresh. Right? You should open a laundromat and call it Clouds of Glory. Drop off your clothes, it comes back laundered. So, says the Ben Ish Chai, that's how the clothing lasted for 40 years. They would walk through the clouds of glory, and it had some, excuse the pun, mystical nature, which would clean and wash their clothing.
But they also
No
grew.
ticky, no washy, though.
The clothes also grew with them.
Right, and agree with them. I guess that would all be, we're assuming, according to the Spanish Chai, that was all part of the clouds of glory. And it says that was where the Jewish people needed protection. But they didn't need that kind of protection. Hashem didn't have to provide it. This was considered an extra thing. And he says when it comes to the water, the Be'er Miriam, was not just water, but it had a special nature where it improved brain function. Specifically, he says, in the area of memory. And he quotes the story of the Arizal, or Reb Chaim Vital, that when Reb Chaim Vital first came to study under the Arizal understood that this was to be his scribe, the person who was going to record all his Torah. The problem was that Reb Chaim Vital couldn't remember everything that the Arizal was saying. So we're told that he took him to the Kinneret. And somewhere in the Kinneret today is the Be'er Miriam. And the Arizal knew where that spot was, and he took a cup of it and gave it to Reb Chaim Vital, who drank that water. And from then on, Reb Chaim Vital remembered everything that the Arizal taught him. That's just from one cup. Could you imagine the strength of the amount of improved brain function of 40 years of drinking this water?
But if we lost the well, how did he...
How the Arizal found it, the Arizal found everything. The Arizal told us where all the graves today, that we know where they are and we go to visit them. It's all because the Arizal stopped and said this is the spot. Not all of them, some of them we know, but the Arizal is the one who pointed many of them out, because that was the Arizal. So he knew how to find the Be'er Miriam, and he gave Reb Chaim Vital. So says the Ben Ish Chai, that's why they're called Matanos Tovos, because they are beyond what was expected and beyond what was necessary. So that's to answer the question, what you mentioned before. The question was, who said they came in the merit of anyone? Maybe they had bread coming from heaven because they had to eat. So says the Ben Ish Chai, the emphasis here is on the extra. All this other stuff about the man, the Be'er, and the clouds of glory. That's what we're focused on. Why did the Jewish people merit that? And that's what we're saying. In the merit of Moshe, the Jewish people had all these tastes in the man. In the merit of Aaron, the clouds of glory laundered their clothes. And in the merit of Miriam, the Be'er Miriam, the water, brought with it wisdom and memory and understanding. Then the question is, why did they disappear at the passing of Aaron? It's just the laundry function should have shut down. Right? The answer is because the Jewish people were failing to recognize that all this was happening in the merit of Aaron. For 40 years, Hashem is waiting for someone to figure out, well, how do we merit this special thing? And therefore, when Aaron passes away and the clouds of glory stop, they're going to come back. They're going to come back in the merit of Moshe. But they stop, so the Jewish people realize that the clouds of glory are working. So what we would say then is that maybe Avraham, Ben Ish Chai doesn't say this, but maybe Avraham, he provided enough for the basic. Take a look. What did Avraham? He provided a little bit of food. It was just basic food, so the Jewish people would have gotten food. But all the tastes and all the extra stuff that's in these gifts, that's in the merit of Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam.
But why would the people as a whole assume that the clouds of glory were because of Aaron, or the man was because of Moshe, as opposed to anybody else, or as opposed...
Oh, well, I'm not asking how they should have assumed. I'm asking, or what we're saying is that they should have asked. They could have looked into the subject. Now, why is Hashem granting us this favor that the bread can taste like anything? What did we do to deserve that? And had they asked or looked into it, they would have received an answer that it's because Moshe Rabbeinu had done all the things that he had done.
But they had seen so many miracles already.
Right, but
they have seen it as this is another one of these miracles that Hashem is doing for us?
Right, but which miracles did they see that was not necessary? All the miracles they had were necessary. This is seemingly unnecessary. Why should Hashem allow them to have any taste? Man should taste like man. And man had a taste, because it tasted like tzapichas v'devash. It had a default taste. if you were thinking that you wanted it to taste like man, that's what it would taste like. So it tasted like a donut, or whatever else bread baked in honey tastes like. It had a taste, it had a flavor, but Hashem gave it these properties that it should be able to taste like more.
So we're supposed to question every little detail of something that happens,
When we get more than what we
but we
need.
don't realize it's more. I bet they didn't realize that's more than they could have gotten.
That's
than
right.
they should have gotten. I mean, this is what they got, so they just accepted it. This is what we
That's
got.
right. That's
You said
right.
you're supposed to question, or you should thank Hashem?
Well, you're all right. We need to be considerate, and we need to think about all the things which we have that we take for granted, all the things, the gifts, all this extra stuff that we have, things that are natural and things that we've received in life, and that's the lesson of this week's parsha. The Jewish people lose all these things because we still do it. We have so many things in our lives that we don't appreciate because we don't think about them. And so the Jewish people didn't ask the question of why is the man taste so good? Why can we taste medium rare steaks in the man? They didn't ask that question because they didn't consider to appreciate. 40 years Hashem is waiting for someone to ask the question, and nobody asks the question. If you don't ask the questions, you don't get the answer.
Why didn't Moshe suggest to them they should be asking this question?
Then it's not appreciated.
All right.
But I mean,
Even when you ask the
but
question, you
still,
don't get an answer.
he could have said, given a Musar lecture just like this, like, why don't you appreciate it? Look what Hashem's done. He's given you not just man, but man that tastes like whatever you
There's
want.
some lessons that are so much better learned
What can I do to put
through a lesson such as this. Now, I think ask anyone who has broken a leg or a finger, right? The next day when they make those brachos, right? Someone who has has to wear an eye patch, or even worse, has to wear these dark sunglasses because they're not supposed to see things for a week. When they take it off the next day, that pokeach ivrim, some people miss even those cues, but that pokeach ivrim, Hashem who opens the eyes of the blind, that person makes that bracha with intention. And how long does that last? We make these brachas every day for everything which we have, because we wake up in the morning and we don't appreciate. We have shoes. Do you remember how tired you were when you went to sleep? And now you've got that strength back. Why? Because Hashem gave us this function called sleep. And so our sages were concerned that we would miss this point. So they gave us brachos. And in these brachos we're supposed to think about all the great things that we have. And we sleep through the brachos. Jewish people missed it. After 40 years, they wake up to realize that all this time, thirsting for water, and they say, wait, that was all in the merit of Miriam. There's a famous question of the Chidah. Interesting question. This question has a lot of answers because it makes for great Sukkos Torah. The Chidah asks, why is it that we have a Yom Tov of Sukkos to celebrate the clouds of glory, and we have no Yom Tov for the man and the be'er?
Maybe I'm blanking out on the name, on Sukkot.
We have, but it's not celebration of the water that we had in the wilderness. I mean, you could probably tie it in through a drasha, but so that's not the reason. That's certainly not the reason given. And we don't have a whole Yom Tov. But by Sukkot, we say, by Sukkot stage Shivas Yamim, Ki Sukkot so Shavti as Bnei Yisrael, because I put the Jewish people in Sukkot. So why do we have a Yom Tov for that? So the Chidah himself gives three answers. We're not going to go so much into each of these answers, but The first answer he gives is something which was discussed before, which is that bread and water were necessary for basic life. The clouds of glory, the Jewish people could have technically done without. It would have been a struggle, there would have been heat, there would have been weather to deal with, but they could have figured out a way and made it, tents and whatever, wrapped their heads. They could have somehow survived, but bread and water were without choice. Therefore, bread and water are not such a great, we're not as thankful for, meaning, obviously we're thankful, but that's not an extra thing to make a Yom Tov for. If Hashem took us out, He's got to give us bread and water. But the clouds of glory, that's a miracle we actually have to make a Yom Tov for. That's the first answer which he gives.
Can't you say that all of them are wrapped up into Sukkot?
We don't, though. You could go back and tie them up, but we don't.
Because
And certainly,
how many holidays can you have for the 40 years?
we Jews don't have any shortage of holidays.
I know,
Right?
but-
Another 3-day Yom Tov. That's what we need. Yeah. You can tie it all in, but it isn't. It isn't officially. It's certainly not in the Torah. The Torah doesn't say that we have Sukkos also because of the man and the be'er.
Well,
The
the Torah
Torah,
doesn't tell us that on Shavuos we celebrate Shavuos because of Matan Torah.
right? That's true. That's true. But we're saying in the Torah does pick one of these three gifts and makes a Yom Tov about it. Kibat Sukkos or Shafti es b'nei Yisrael. So why not the man and bear? I mean, that's at least that's the way the Chida asks the question. So the first answer is that the man and bear are necessary for basic life. The second answer he gives was that the clouds of glory had another unique factor in that they were only for the Jewish people, as opposed to the Erev Rav. The Erev Rav, the mixed multitudes, he quotes Midrashim, that were not inside the clouds of glory. Therefore, Ki Basukkos Hoshafti as B'nai Yisrael, the Jewish people, so that's a special endearment. And obviously, the two are connected, because it wasn't so necessary, so let the Erev Rav schlep around a bit. But the Jewish people, but the man and the be'er, they needed to have. So we want to celebrate this unique gift that was only for the Jewish people. That's the second answer that he gives. The third answer is fascinating from the Chida. He says that the man and the be'er came through the Jewish people complaining. And therefore, we don't get a holiday for that. The clouds of glory, which were given when they came without any complaints to the Jewish people, that's something we have a greater level of connection and appreciation for, and therefore we have a Yom Tov for that. Okay, that's the Chida. However, if I may, with whatever time we have left, the Bnei Yissaschar quotes this Chida and adds a whole new level of depth into really all of these explanations. Because again, what we're saying is that the issue here is a question of the Jewish people's appreciation. And all three explanations of the Chida are related to the concept of appreciation. Whether it's you appreciate the fact that the other two needed to be there, but this is extra, or it's because we appreciated that this was given to the Jewish people specifically, or we got it without complaining, meaning that we didn't feel it was a concession to us, but we understood. So the Bnei Yissaschar asks a question, which is, how could it be that when the Jewish people sin with the golden calf, that they're still being surrounded by the clouds of glory? You would think Hashem is threatening Moshe, he says, I'm going to wipe these people out. And yet, at that time, they're still surrounded by the clouds of glory. I should point out that this goes against the opinion of the Gra. The Gra says the reason why Sukkot is after Yom Kippur is because after the sin of the Chet HaEgel, the clouds of glory went away and came back after Yom Kippur when the Jewish people were forgiven, which is why we have Sukkot at that point in time. But he's not considering this approach of the Gra, of the Vilna Gaon, and he's assuming that while the Jewish people were sinning in the wilderness with the golden calf, they were still being surrounded by the clouds of glory. How do we understand that? So he says a concept that's very difficult for me to explain, really difficult for anyone to explain. So Gemara in Avodah Zarah. The Gemara says that the Jewish people of that generation were better than that sin of the golden calf. They were above that kind of lowly sin. But Hashem arranged for it to happen so that they can teach the Jewish people what teshuvah means and how teshuvah works. Now, if you want to understand this Gemara, there's lots of books on it, lots of Sfarim try to explain it, especially Reb Tzadok HaKohen throughout all his writings. Very difficult Gemara. Again, the Jewish people were above the sin of the golden calf, but Hashem arranged for it to happen so they can teach the Jewish people how to do teshuvah. So the question is, why this generation? Why did Hashem do it that it should happen the same people who received the Torah 40 days later? Well, 40 would have been okay. 39 and a half days later, they sinned with the golden calf. 39 and a half days after receiving the Torah. Why did Hashem arrange it for these people specifically? Furthermore, we have a rule that Hashem keeps bad things away from tzaddikim. Why does Hashem leave Aaron in such a predicament that he ends up arranging for the golden calf? In the end, even though he was trying to do something different, he was trying to stall the Jewish people, but it ends up that the golden calf happens through him. So he explains, because, again, I'm having trouble saying the words because it's such a difficult concept to relay, but he says, because this was necessary, this was a necessary function for the future history of the Jewish people to have the incident of the golden calf, and we needed the greatest of people to sin, and the greatest of people to do teshuvah, and we needed Aaron, who was this great tzaddik. You ready for this? Because good things happen through good people. I'll say that again. The golden calf happens through Aaron because good things happen through good people.
The possibility of tshuva being
Right.
the good thing.
Right. Being a greater good than the harm that was caused. So this concept of the entire Jewish people sinning and the teshuvah, and that's why we say, Malkum Shabali Tshuva Omdim Tzadikim Gemurim Eini Mecholim Lamod, that a Baal Tshuva is on a higher level than a Tzadik Gamur, because the Baal Tshuva is in a holier place. So therefore, Aaron leading the Jewish people to become the Baal Tshuva is a good thing happening through a good person.
You mean to say there weren't enough sins that the Bnei Israel did on their own? Hashem had to manufacture one for them so that they would do tshuva?
Yeah, because we need a real sin. This is a genuine, serious.
Raglan wasn't a big enough sin.
That Ragam didn't happen yet. The Jewish people then piled on. That was the problem. But originally it was just going to be the golden calf. They were going to do the golden calf. They were going to fall. They were going to pick themselves up through Teshuvah, and Yom Kippur was going to raise the Jewish people back up to the level they were, and they were going to travel straight into Eretz Yisrael. And then they said, whoa, a second, we want some spies.
Wait. If Hashem is all-knowing, wouldn't he have known that was going to happen? So to say Hashem arranged this...
Well, I'm going to avoid the whole discussion of free will versus Hashem's foreknowledge, because that's a good question. That's a good question, but that's a question in general.
Hashem arranged...
Well, Hashem arranged it, meaning he put this stumbling block before them and sent all the messengers. In the end, we're still assuming they had free will. How that works is a good question. But
How is it that there's a statement, I don't know if it's in the Gemara or in the Midrash, that all the sins of the Jewish people, in some sense, trace back to the ego.
right.
Okay. So if Hashem arranged that they were going to do this, why, if that was what it was supposed to be, just limited to that, why would there be sins in the future that would somehow trace back to this?
Oh no, because every time we fall back to that place. But that's true of every Baal Tshuva. If you have a Baal Tshuva who regresses, so he's regressing to their state that they were. So every time we regress back to that place. But the Tshuva is supposed to bring us higher. So the Jewish people were tzaddikim gemurim, we're assuming, on some level. And then Aaron was going to lead them to become Baalei Tshuva, who are greater than the tzaddikim gemurim. This is a very difficult concept, because obviously we don't tell anyone, you're too big of a tzaddik, you need to do some averis, some real big averis, so you can be a real big Baalei Tshuva. Obviously we never say that. But somehow, this is a good thing happening through a good person. That's what... So...
Hashem, even in the Torah, he says, I don't visit the chait of the fathers on the sons, or the sons on the father, the chait of the sons on the father. I just can't even fathom that Hashem would orchestrate sin. He does, not only does he not make us responsible for our fathers or children's sins, but I can't even imagine how he could.
I should tell you, the truth is, there's another Gemara. When in the beginning of Sefer Devarim, Moshe Rabbeinu refers to all the sins of the Jewish people, and he refers to the Echet Egel as V'di Zahav. Why? Says the Gemara, because and the Gemara uses a very difficult language. The Gemara says, this is a mashal to a king who dresses his son, the prince, in fancy clothing and anoints him in fancy oils so he smells good, and ties a bag of coins around his neck and places him for the brothel and expects him not to sin. That's the language that the Gemara uses. V'di zahav means they had too much gold. So it seems like, again, that's what we have to clarify. Hashem didn't take away their free will, but Hashem does make arrangements for the Jewish people to be challenged in a way where they weren't regularly supposed to be challenged.
So maybe providing them the gold is what you're saying is...
Right. I mean, however, and the situation, and Moshe disappearing, and the lack of clarity in the exact timing, and sending the evil inclination to show them Moshe's death, all those things they still have free will, but still it was to arrange, because this was supposed to be the teaching of Teshuvah for all times.
But I guess there was still free will because the women didn't participate and the Levine didn't participate.
That's a good point.
So
That's a really good point. That does prove. Yeah.
This.
Okay, so that's a really good
In
point.
other words, the dark side was so drawn to this and extracted so much energy from
Right.
it.
So he says that's why the clouds of glory don't go away, because it wasn't fully, at least, the fault of the Jewish people. It wasn't a straightforward sin, and that's where the clouds of glory remain. So he says like this. Why does it have to be through these people? So he says, because the number one attribute that leads someone to teshuvah is the attribute of das. Das is of a knowledge, but it's more than just knowledge in terms of information. It's where the knowledge becomes a part of you. And this generation is called the Dor Deah, the generation of das, of knowledge of this kind. The pasuk says by the Kohen, Ki sifsei Kohen yishmeru das. This is about the level of das, of knowing, of truly knowing, which of course should remind anyone of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra. The Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, which is what we call really, it's the opposite. It's where you know evil for good and good for evil. But Das means that you can distinguish and separate. That's why when we have to make a special bracha to Hashem for separating between dark and light, for separating between Shabbos and the weekday, which bracha do we make Havdalah in? In the Shemona Esrei, Matzah Shabbos, we make it in the bracha of Chonein Hadas. Because it's Das which creates Havdalah, which creates separation, which creates distinction. The awareness of the details and nuances, that's the power of Das. And these were the most nuanced people in the history of the world. And therefore, they had to be the ones, because what's the bracha that comes right after Baruch Atah Hashem Chonein Hadas? What's Teshuvah? Hashivenu v'ntzarasecha. So Teshuvah is a result of Das. You know what the opposite of Das is? Iruv, or confusion. Otherwise known as the Eruv Rav. Moshe brings out the Eruv Rav. They are not in a state of fixing. They are not in a state of clarity. They bring with them Eruv, or confusion. Check it out. Eruv, spelled Ayin Reish Beis, and Rav Reish Beis, total numerical value 474, which is the exact numerical value of the word Das. Eruv Rav and Das are the same numerical value, because they are the door of Das, and against them you have on the opposite side, which is of course going to have the same numerical value, is the Eruv Rav. The clouds of glory were meant to show who the Jewish people were and who the heir of Rav were. The clouds of glory, as we just explained, took in only the Jewish people. That's why what we're looking for, as we say on Chukas, Laman Yedu Dorosechem, that we should have a more nuanced approach to life. So therefore, we look at the clouds of glory. We look at Aaron, who the verse says, "Kisif Seiko and Yishmer Udas." Aaron was the one who was showing them these distinctions. It's through Aaron that we merited this understanding of the separation. That's why, because Aaron is this master of Das, he understood the divisions and the distinctions. That's why it's through him Hashem led him to lead the Chet of the Egel, so that he can teach the Jewish people Teshuvah. The problem with us is that we don't have a nuanced approach to life, and we take everything for granted. We focus on 3 things every day. We focus on 5 things every day, instead of focusing on everything. Most of our day becomes routine, and we don't appreciate life, and so we don't see when man is falling out of the sky, and when the clouds of glory are protecting us. We don't see when the well of Miriam comes, and we don't get it. We don't understand it until we have the loss of Aaron and the loss of Miriam. Going back to what Rabbeinu Bachya said before, Miriam standing, there the same term of das, because she wasn't just there out of curiosity. She understood that there was something that she needed to do. Her mother, Yocheved, went out, put the basket in the water, and then did what? Left. Went home. And to Miriam, nothing is taken for granted. Everything needs to be watched and perceived. She needed to understand not what she could do, but what would happen. It turns out that she got a chance to participate. She wasn't watching to participate. She was watching to know and see and understand what was happening. Aaron HaKohen was someone who looked at the details of everything. Moshe Rabbeinu was someone who looked at the details of it. These were people who appreciated what was given to them more than what was necessary. So while Avram Avinu gave us the merit that we should receive these 3 gifts, we would have received them very simply. It takes Shlosha Parnasim Tovim. It takes the 3 great providers of the Jewish people who did so much more, who went beyond the letter of the law, beyond what was required in every single case. And if you look through the Torah, you'll see that everything that Aaron does is just one step above. How do they get to that place? By only in one way. You can only do slightly more when you appreciate everything you have. When you don't take anything for granted. When you notice every little thing. You know which person does a really amazing job at decorating a room? Someone who understands every nuance of what every little thing brings out. Moshe, Aaron, and Miriam understood with all these gifts what was nuanced about each one. That's what the Jewish people missed in those 40 years. They didn't understand it until those things are taken away. Parshas Chukas is a very difficult parsha. Parshas Chukas is the parsha where we are introduced at the beginning of the parsha to the Parah Aduma, the red cow, which we have no clue about. We have some midrashim, but in terms of how the Parah Aduma works, we don't have a clue. You know why we don't have a clue? Because we walk around most of our life not noticing all the little things and what they are and what they do. The parsha of Chukas, following the Parah Aduma, is the loss of all these great tzaddikim, and then, only then, after death, as we say, Achrei Mos Kedoshim, after death, when we begin to appreciate. the das. Das is maturity. Das is understanding. Das is knowing and taking all these thoughts and making them real. We are about to enter into times that are difficult for the Jewish people. They're difficult for the Jewish people because we walk through life without noticing. The Jewish people didn't appreciate what they had then either. May we take it upon ourselves that if we're going to focus on anything, especially at this time of the year, it's that we should appreciate everything that we have, not just the things that we know to appreciate, but find some things that we don't even know that we should appreciate and appreciate them too. Thank you.
Thank you.